the okay. I'll start that again then. So I hope these meetings prove to be productive. I'd welcome everybody's feedback, and remember the agenda of these meetings is up to you guys to decide. If there's anything you want to know about, it's up to you to say. It's also up to you guys to volunteer to actually host some of these. So if I don't hear people volunteering, then I will be nominating. So without further ado, over to the star of the show. Ladies and gentlemen, we introduce Mr. Christopher Sheldon.
Thank you. Okay, so I talk about continuous delivery quite a lot. You're probably all sick of it by now, so the first presentation being given is on continuous delivery. So this is just to go over some of the basics, make sure everyone's up to speed. So it's kind of about gates, which is why there's a picture of a gate on the front, and googly eyes just because it's like one of those om nom nom mouths. So first things, where does it stem from? So the very first agile principle is customer satisfaction by early and continuous delivery of valuable software. That's like the fundamental tenet. We all do this to get stuff out the door. If it sits in dev, if it sits in production, it's useless until it's actually out there in the hands of the customer and being used, and at the end of the day, earning the company all the money. So it's also in the third principle as well, which is that states that working software is delivered frequently. Now, how often is frequently? So traditionally, if you go back to the 80s, it could have been yearly. Now we're looking at monthly, but maybe weekly, daily, hourly, seconds. How often is frequently? What is the time frame of continuous delivery for something from inception to actual release out the door? And how often should those releases occur? So we've almost got this idea, this thought that we should be releasing stuff more frequently, but why? Why do we do that? Well, there's a few benefits. Yeah. So faster reaction times. We all need to respond to the needs of the business in the quickest way possible, so that we can get that stuff out the door. So whether it's a new feature or a schema change, critical bug, just a simple marketing splash thing, if you have to wait a couple of months, 6 months for this feature to become realized, then it's not going to have the impact that's potentially needed. The ceremony and risk around releasing is also vastly reduced. Because you do it more frequently, the idea is you get used to it. Do hard things often. So conversely, people think that if you employ continuous delivery, you're sort of cutting corners and risk increases. We'll show sort of later on that actually that risk will be reduced. Exposed inefficiencies and costs. So the very process of automation will highlight inefficiencies. It will highlight when people are using manual processes, when manual steps are being done. It will also highlight redundant services, slow infrastructure, that kind of stuff as well. So it's all about freeing up people's time. So you're not doing manual things, so you can do more interesting stuff. So instead of doing manual regression, you can do discovery testing, things like that. Instead of manually copying files over, you could be writing an awesome new algorithm. Also enables flexible release options. So you can release to specific customers, subset customers, and also you can ensure sort of functionality and scale across these different customers as well. Features can be developed and tested, but often you can leave them baking in production, so not turned on, and then you can release them. You can show them to customers more sort of business critical time in the future. Facebook do this as well. So a load of their features are currently sitting in production, you're just not aware of them. So the business controls when they're turned on. So we've got some of the benefits. Kind of understand-ish where it came about. What exactly is it? How do we do continuous delivery? So it all hinges around something called a deployment pipeline, and this is really the crux of it. So everyone will have a deployment pipeline at the moment, but quite often there'll be a lot of sort of manual steps in it, things that really sort of slow down getting work out the door. So if we look at this is where it's important to be on the screen. So this the presentation is being recorded, so you'll be able to go and sort of review this later. If you look at the very first step, you've got a developer, and they will check in their code. Then what happens? You'll say your TeamCity, your Jenkins, your Bamboo. It picks up this change, it compiles the code, and runs a suite of unit tests against it. Now in this example here, we've got a unit test that's failed. So already you can see how we're starting to bake quality into the pipeline. It's encouraging developers to write unit tests to make sure they're not breaking existing unit tests, and just by the idea of writing unit tests, it enforces quality by enforcing the solid principles. Some of you practice TDD, which is great, but you don't need to do that to write unit tests. So your test breaks, your server actually rejects the change, so you go back to stage 1, do not pass go. So the developer thinks, okay, the change is broken, then refactor my code a bit, make sure the little bug's fixed, and they do another push. They do another push, commit into source control. TeamCity picks it up again. It runs the unit tests, thinks great, they all pass. So what we can do now is we can now progress on to the next stage, which is automation tests. So these can be sort of end-to-end tests in Selenium, or actually you can there's actually integration tests as well, which sort of cross boundaries, that kind of stuff. But in a nutshell, more tests are run. Now in this example here, what they got labeled, they've got automated acceptance tests. So they fail. So that could have been that maybe an element in the HTML markup has changed, which means a button can't be clicked anymore, which means a major piece of functionality is broken. So that will be picked up, change will get rejected, all the way back to square one. So currently the developer doesn't have a chance of reaching production until these issues are ironed out. So the developer goes again, he looks at the test, he either changes the test to make it more suitable, or he goes and changes his code so it then passes. Developer then...
Sorry, Chris, can you get closer to the laptop again?
Yeah. So then the developer... I'm quite close, but there we go. I'll squat down slightly. So the developer commits a change again. It goes through, and it passes all the gates. So all the unit tests are passed. All, say, the integration test pass. All the automation end-to-end test pass. Everything is cool. And so then it can go on to a manual check. So if a manual QA is happy, or a stakeholder is happy with the way the feature looks, then it can be deployed out to production. So that's the basis of a sort of a very simple deployment pipeline. Now you can also roll other gates in here as well. So you can roll in gates to do with performance. So say if your page load time is greater than a second, that could be a fail. Say if you've not used that, sorry? You've not used that, well, maybe set it at 10 seconds or something like that. 30 seconds? Yeah. So, I mean, you set tolerances for the project of which you're running. The idea is that it enforces a baseline, and then you improve it as you go on. So, if it is 4 minutes for a page to load, great. Just make sure that 4 limits doesn't get breached. Okay. So, all this sounds well and good, and it sounds like it works quite well for small features. What about larger features as well? Because as a practice, you should be sort of committing, pushing your code, quite regularly. But if you've got a massive feature, you don't want to be coding away for days, weeks, all that kind of stuff, and then just fire a load of functionality at the pipeline. It's not going to break, it's going to fall over, things aren't going to be working very well. So, to actually still do your commits, to actually still have that regular sort of interaction with the system, with the pipeline, you can use something called feature toggles. So this is going back to what Facebook do earlier. So you can toggle code off, you can toggle features on and off, so it's not visible to the user. So there's many ways of doing this. So your first push could be just writing a unit test that passes with a bit of functionality in there. There'll be no other method calling it, so actually there's no issue with that going out to production. What you've done is you just created a new test, and it goes out there live. It's good. And then you can slowly build upon that. Only at the last possible moment does it need to be integrated and visible to the customer. Now you can also control that with something called a feature toggle. So say if you've got all this functionality behind an email me button, you've gone and built the email functionality. There's a few methods behind there in your class or something like that. The last thing to go on will be that button, but you can control that using a toggle. You can link it up to a database saying this button is showing, this button is not showing. So this is what gives you the control and flexibility to deploy those really large features and still develop them in an iterative way, but without holding up the pipeline. So that's kind of the general structure of deployment pipeline, of continuous delivery, how one would implement it. And there's some kind of principles that go along with it, because it's very much a cultural thing as well. This is where culture starts to become sort of quite important. So the principles of continuous delivery. The process of releasing and deploying software must be repeatable and reliable. And I've said really, if it varies, then you're going to have problems with it. When things change isn't always a good thing. So how do we overcome this? We automate everything. Absolutely everything. A manual deployment is never repeatable or reliable. You need to automate as much as humanly possible. Now, this doesn't mean you'll get 100% automation, but it's a goal, it's a panacea. What else? If something's difficult or painful, do it more often. Get used to it, it becomes easy. Very much like the child walking type principle. So no wonder releasing is a bit scary if you're doing it every 6 months, every 2 months, even once a week. If you're doing it daily, multiple times a day, it becomes such a regular occurrence that it becomes simple. And also, the amount of change that's being introduced into the system is very small as well. So actually, regression goes down. Just keep it simple, keep it really small changes. You're building upon change after change. And what else we got? Keep everything in source control. Everything. Code's quite a simple one. Database schema is quite simple nowadays. You can even store data in version control. I found that yesterday. So all of Titan that you can get that version, which is pretty amazing, I think. Right, done. Done means released. So software teams should be checking their code after it's been released to make sure that it's working, not just throwing it over the wall, putting it into your version control system, and then moving on to the next task. There's that end-to-end responsibility to that ownership of the actual feature it has. You build quality in, so we've spoken about this before. Unit test coverage. You can also build in things like code styling, complexity measurements, performance. All of these can go into the pipeline to help validate and make sure that the quality is in the code naturally. Everybody has responsible for the release process. A program running on a dev's laptop isn't really going to help the company. You only get valued when it's released into production. Customers using it, you said. So devs should have deployment in mind. This is especially important for large features. If you don't have that deployment in mind, if you don't have the end goal, you're not going to know whether you should use a feature toggle or not. Testers should also have deployment in mind. You can test the actual deployment process, not just the end product. And then improve continuously. So don't sit back and wait for your system to become out of date or impossible to maintain. 20% of project's time should be on continuous improvement, which is tricky, but it is certainly a good goal to have. The commercial argument is very weak. People say, oh, we need to do this, we need to do X, Y, Z, it has a commercial benefit. It's very weak when compared to what technical debt and aging infrastructure can do to and aging processes as well. So we've been running this on the website projects for about 6 months now. Still very much at first steps, but we've learned some interesting things. Had some comments and some interesting side effects, let's say. So one of the comments was, the process is great, we've never had stuff so quickly. That lasted about 2 minutes. So then they wanted it even quicker still. And it really sort of highlights the stakeholders' priorities, because you can see the priorities shifting in their minds from day to day. As soon as you start releasing software, complex features daily, they start wanting things daily, then changing their minds daily, and that's something we're still struggling to deal with. Team and organisation culture becomes actually very important. There's much more responsibility on dev and test to improve the process, take ownership of the features that are being developed. This is where sort of culture becomes really important, and there may be a presentation of culture sort of in the future. I think I put something else there. Yeah. So yeah, we used to use Scrum, we used to use sprints, and after running continuous delivery for not very long, it was only a couple of weeks, we decided to move to Kanban instead, and then we stopped estimating. So I wasn't really expecting that. I still expected to be running Scrum today, but we stopped doing it for this particular project. So, continuous deployment. So, is there a stage further than continuous delivery? Yes, continuous deployment. So, you saw there was that manual check in the deployment pipeline previously. So, continuous deployment is, that manual check is kind of still there, but every change that gets pushed goes out to production. Every change that passes the gates goes straight out to production. And that's continuous deployment. So in order to be doing that, you need to be doing continuous delivery. So currently we only do continuous delivery. We do frequent deployments, but not everyone goes through. Generally because the business may want to hold off on stuff, or it just comes down to time really and patching. But that's something we're trying to move towards. And last but not least, there's an excellent book. If you've never heard of Jez Humble, he sort of collated all this information and put it in a good book as well. So if anyone's got further interest, I suggest you check that out. It's a very good read. A lot of pages, a lot of information. It goes into a lot of detail about sort of end-to-end Selenium testing, about how to do it, because by nature they can be very brittle and break quite often when you change the UI. So it tells you strategies about dealing with that. I think there's a section on databases as well, which you can have a whole presentation on. There's also a section on source control strategies, because branching and continuous delivery don't really go hand in hand. There's a lot of detail in that book, so I'd recommend it. And that's it really. So time for questions.
Okay, any questions?
Oh, I actually raised my hand. So the start of the continuous delivery, a few weeks of waiting. I know you mentioned a few items that we took away, stating how the business was asking for more and quicker changes and stuff. Similar to that, how is impact from the business side of it when you have multiple teams consuming that change? Like, for example, if it's send teams out, sales teams out, it's like the whole round. How is it that when you put a change into production, that it impacted them, didn't impact them, or is it only that piece of code that we tested? Takeaways from that.
So you're right. So it comes down to
Chris, I've got no idea what the question was at all.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So in a nutshell, we're releasing these changes quite frequently. How does the rest of the business sort of deal and consume these changes if they're occurring on a daily basis? Is that good? Yeah. So I see it as very much as an extension of support. I mean, so currently all changes for release go through to support, and then support educate the rest of the business on the new changes. They train up IT support, all that kind of stuff. So this will be happening on a more frequent basis. And the idea is that the changes are much smaller, so you may get the occasional large feature delivered, which would then be supported very much as it is today. The same processes will occur, but all those small changes should trickle through. And this is where things like improved documentation can help, transparency of what's going into release. There's a lot of sort of documentation and supporting materials that we just don't have the time to deliver. But those are kind of the things that people would deploy to overcome that. And if you look at Google, their mantra is you make it as simple as possible, so support is actually very
We use feature toggling a lot. It's called centers in countries. We also have switch dynamic, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's used for it's not, here's a half-assed, unimplemented bit of code.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's brilliant from the airy-fairy, brilliant ideal world of, here's a website and we're deploying it, but taking that and applying it to something the scale of Titan, you're making changes to the guts of an invoicing process. You're not going to copy and paste the code to have one that's toggled on and off because you fix a bug in that and forget it over there.
So
You
one of my
flip a switch and you reintroduce a bug you've already fixed.
So one of my peers works for the Royal Bank of I forget, some massive bank, and they operate continuous delivery on their finance systems.
They probably also have the ability to test it in environments and actual infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's the root cause of the issue, not the actual usage of feature toggles.
No, but also feature toggles aren't the only way to do continuous delivery. You say branching doesn't work. I would argue that a feature branch is a perfect way of doing it because you complete the feature, you merge it back down, and it then hits the rest of that pipeline exactly the same way.
Yeah, and
but for something like Titan, there's a hell of a lot less risk of deploying finished crap.
Merging can take a lot of time, especially for long-lived features.
Depends what you do.
Yeah, so long-lived feature branches are discouraged in continuous delivery. It's mostly around trunk-based development, because as soon as you start,
we've had real problems with long-based feature branches.
Because as soon as you've got that,
TFS that can't branch and can't merge.
well, this is why moving to Bitbucket is TFS.
Indeed, moving to Git,
So
you gain the flexibility to be able to do that sort of
it's much better. But the idea is, if you're working off a branch, then you're not pushing your code regularly. You're not integrating. You're not getting validation from your peers.
Deploying a half-assed, unfinished bit of code, you might as well actually have something finished before you deploy it, rather than the risk of having, have I turned it all off?
Nothing should be half-assed.
Well,
You should only be pushing quality.
You've got a feature that's you're developing 3 weeks. Do you sit there with it on your local machine at risk of being lost, or do you stick it in a branch in source control, therefore other people can collaborate and work on it? How do you manage that?
It's quite a change in mindset, and this is where the onus on culture and teams and developers comes more into play, because you've got the responsibility to push it into the pipeline, to integrate it often. So if you've got a large team of, say, 5 people doing this, and then it comes to a massive merge fest at the end.
No, I'm talking about, say, a single in Titan World CR. That needs to be done before it can go.
This is an isolated incident, so it needs to be done before it's gone. But the idea is, if you're not pushing regularly, then you do run a risk of having integration problems.
Well, no, but if you haven't finished it, there's no point pushing it anyway.
Well, it depends what tests are going to run on it. It depends where you're going to test it.
Depends where it's going, yeah. But I mean, if you've made a change to the middle of the invoicing system, and end of the day, someone checks it in, you fucked it. It doesn't work.
Well, not if you've toggled it. You just toggle your work on until it's complete.
Yeah, but so you're taking an entire copy of it. Someone else fixes a bug in the bit.
Well, no, because
you've then got 2.
You only toggled a little bit that you're fixing it.
We make fundamental changes to things like that. It's all inclusive. It's fundamental. It's 300 or 400 files. So you put 300 or 400 toggles in the places to toggle these bits. Do you then go back and remove those later? Because that's just building technical debt.
Yeah. So you'll make improvements to existing features.
Yes. This is what I'm saying. In the great world of,
so
it's all new
technical
greenfield
debt,
stuff. When you're polishing a 10-year-old turd like Titan, it's
technical debt
difficult to manage that.
and toggles is an issue. There should always be time to go out and refactor your toggles and remove toggles. That is one of the major issues of
to
toggles.
finish a feature, let alone refactor it.
Well, exactly. So put toggles in there. Toggles is one of the most controversial topics of continuous delivery. Everyone's always going to have an opinion on it, and it's a fundamental change in mindset. It really is. So let's maybe leave it there for now.
Okay, a different issue then. When you talked about continuous delivery and then continuous deployment, without having that third gate of somebody looking at it as in a final, for me that would be our current UAT team, who represent the business, if you like. And some others can hear me, but often we get CRs written, and it's only when people look at the functionality and then they actually decide it's not what they wanted in the first place. If you don't have that final gate, are you potentially pushing out functionality that's incorrect?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, continuous deployment isn't for all projects.
Yeah.
So something like Titan may not make sense.
I think it could be for some things.
Yeah, exactly. Some like simple stuff, it's fine, but yeah.
But isn't that like the fail fast?
Yeah,
You're going to
exactly.
fail fast and fix it quick. So you've deployed it to production. It's going to fall out, so it's going to notice it. But don't like it.
The problem with Titan is it doesn't just break that little bit.
Yeah.
It's not about it being correct. It should have passed all the tests and not broken it. It's more than actually the functionality isn't actually what we want. You know, we've introduced a new piece of functionality that suddenly every customer gets an email or something, and it's saying please log on to this site, and that site, other site doesn't exist, or something.
Yeah. No, if
You know, it's something like that.
Yeah.
To use a crude example.
but then, you know, if it's wrapped up in a business toggle, then it's not an issue. So
They just
it's like, oh, actually, no, we don't want that. All right,
but yeah,
switch it off.
Titans.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to do that.
No, again, it's applying this to Titan.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously,
It's
Titan teams that come at it from that.
I mean, it's very general, so that in very much it's a paradigm to try and follow, to try and sort of hit it. But you know, the implementation will vary per project. The amount of automation, the type of automation used will vary per project.
But even on that delivery pipeline, you put various gateways for automation testing, passing, and also sign off from support that they're aware of what's going in from UAT as we do with the change control process. We have that baked into the pipeline. So as soon as those ticks get put in the system, so they've still got the ability to look at a feature and go, that's a pilot crap. Work it, or approve it, and then automatically just goes out to the world.
Anything else?
Well, I definitely, from the bug fixing point of view and data fixes and so on, definitely like to see Himabindu, David checking the change, and with the testing, Selenium testing, all the rest of it, I'd like to see it automatically deployed into production.
Yeah, you get that regression pack up and running, get that into the pipeline. I mean, you don't have to have the end-to-end pipeline to start off with. That's a goal. You know, just having the automation pack run before hitting production. That's a game changer.
That's the thing. It's almost
This is where you get to the feature toggles.
It's almost the opposite with Titan. That we can apply that to small fixes like bugs, but actually for implementing CR level features, when you're digging 300 or 400 places, you've got to put 300 or 400 toggles, and it's not practical.
We end up taking more time to deploy code than.
Maybe I should do a presentation on toggles.
Yeah.
We can which is fine. It makes sense because there are pros and
Sit
cons.
with Simon
There are
as he's
pros and
developing
cons.
one of these things and do a code review of 30, 40, 50 files and say he's got to go and put a toggle in each of those. Forget one, it falls over.
That's fine.
Okay. Features that span Titan.
Yeah.
Well, you've got different different testing sort of strategies for that. But I think the toggles is the interesting one because that is the contentious one.
How do you handle breaking your integration tests?
We just
I've answered my question. question.
Yeah, you just ignore it, failure unit testing, checking it in the build.
Obviously, our public-facing web services, for example,
So
which are not covered again by
what the
automation tests.
what one of the another principle which I don't think I put in there was that if a test is broken, if any stage of the pipeline is broken, it's a code red. So then they put a 10-minute time frame on this, because the most important thing is keeping the pipe up and running. So if a dev pushes a change that causes a unit test to break, they've got 10 minutes to either fix that change or revert it back out. Therefore, you're keeping your quality up, not blocking other features from being done. That's how that's dealt with. And again, there's a big onus on the team. It's not just devs.
When you're at the deployment process, if it's a breaking change during deployment, because our system has to be up continually, so when we deploy, none of those changes can be breaking.
Oh,
I know that.
I see. So I believe that going back to the developer responsibility and having deployment in mind, there are probably coding strategies that can be put in place to mitigate breaking changes. So while the implementation may not be from A to B, you'll be going via C, sort of using sort of intermediary tables, intermediary processes, that kind of stuff. I think by changing the way you code things and having that deployment in the back of your mind, you could overcome probably about 95%.
I think that's the nail on the head. I think we'd all have to change the way we develop in every team. To think about deployment and to say no downtime, deploy with every change you make, whether it's schema or code.
Without having tests to check the interfaces and, for example, web services or parameters or blocks, without tests around all of that, we would never have the confidence to say we won't break it.
So we need the test first,
Yeah.
but we also need to change the way we think about how we
So
code
about
as well.
deployment as well,
We need to do
like,
both.
deploying something like adding columns to service style while tightens up and people are going through it just isn't possible. You would need a second one that's mirrored, do it on one, fail over, update the second.
Maybe that's how we do it.
Well, Colin's been talking about that sort of thing for years, and we just don't have the infrastructure to
Exactly.
support that.
There's certainly strategies to sort of deal with this.
We probably need a separate talk on database.
So toggles is definitely a talk on its own. Databases is definitely a talk on its own. It's quite easy with code. With databases, it's a bit more interesting. You could probably do a separate talk on automation and testing, because that's what really is the backbone behind all this. Culture as well. Culture is very important, which I'm trying to find out a bit about. So, because the mindset has to change. Like you say, keep deployment in mind, that kind of stuff. Okay. Anything else? Anything from the laptop?
Well, we haven't heard most of it, so
sorry. It was mostly a discussion. So
that's fine. So no, I mean, certainly not from me. I'm reasonably up on the ideas anyway. So, Stephen? No,
I need to learn. I need to learn not to talk on mute. That's no, not for me. That's kind of what Chris has described. Is pretty much what we do on NWP. I think the challenge of this is getting the people from above to buy into it. And,
I think buying into it is in one regard a no-brainer. Do you want stuff quicker? Yes. Okay, great. But getting them to buy into the process to facilitate this is potentially difficult. So.
Exactly. Particularly, you list things like your 20% for improvement. Well, we haven't done that in weeks. Just everything is urgent. Everything is now. Everything is estimates. All this. I think it's a lot of it's very good in theory, but until you get your customers to buy into it, I think the theory is never going to match the reality. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try, though.
Yeah, I mean, there are potentially sort of ways around that. So, which we've employed in the past, sort of hacking systems slightly. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. Oh, one more.
Thanks. Is that another question, or is it ending?
Sorry, we've got one more question.
Ah.
Scope work. Yeah, so from, say, a business analyst, sorry, the question was, what about scope? So when it comes to changes, you can end up sort of updating 50 files for features in sort of upstream systems, that kind of stuff. So from a business analysis perspective, there's something called like the invest model of speccing out user stories. So a story should be, was it independent, negotiable? One of the most important ones is the S at the end is small and testable. So if you've got small stories, then actually ideal for small feature-based development. So you don't have to worry about feature topics as much for small features. So I think keep your stories small. That helps with scope, and also maybe look at architecture as well. So if you're having to change 50 files for a feature, then maybe I'd question the architecture or the actual.
Look, but we've got Titan.
Titan
is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. But I'd question the architecture or the initial stories.
So do we just accept that that's the way it is?
No. Do we accept that's the way it is? Titan's Titan? For me, no. You'll be saying it, 20 years time. There's always a chance to improve. So as soon as you accept it, then why bother?
Well, if we accept it, why not try with what's it called, the MBPRs and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, exactly.
It's better to start it today rather than say, oh yeah, we'll start it 10 years time.
I agree, and we're making inroads. We've got Bitbucket coming, which is much better at sort of merging than CFS. We're fleshing out the MBPRs. We're working closely with Ian to get things automated on the website of things.
Regression pack running for the first time.
Regression pack for
And
Titan.
that way, it sort of highlights all the problems we've got, and we see the best way to sort of infrastructure-wise and find a solution for Titan. Just prevent Titan from being such a nightmare.
Yeah, exactly.
At the end of the day, we're developing software. We're not building a monster.
We have.
So you say about the time for continual improvement. Yes, it's hard to get, but these changes, keep eye on the prize. You'll get there in the end.
But I think ultimately, if you look back over the last 5 years in the deploy process now to what it was then, I mean, when I joined, UAT deploys take an hour and a half. Exactly. And how long do they take?
2 hours.
Yeah. So how long do they take now? So
for me, the process is starting something now, rather than just wait until the right time. The business will give us small change. It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure David is happy to start with his team, doing something that's a bit more.
David releases MBPRs every day.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's manual. But we are moving it. When last week we got everything into Bitbucket, and now we're looking to move that forward again. So.
And when your regression pack comes along, that's a game changer. So that's okay. All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks then. Cheers.
Nice one, Chris.